Welcome to the Get Fit with Jodell podcast. I am, as usual, Jodell, and this is going to be an epic conversation. So if you struggle with sleep, energy, weight loss, biotoxin illness, digestive issues, and even have been diagnosed with cancer, you're going to want to take notes listening to my next guest, Dr. John Lieurance. Dr. John Lieurance is a naturopath and a functional chiropractic neurologist whose journey healing himself from toxic Lyme and mold, which I can definitely relate to, helped him discover some revolutionary ways to heal his illnesses. So we're going to take a pretty deep dive into the body's most powerful antioxidant, which is actually, drumroll please, melatonin, as something that goes beyond sleep. It's not just a sleep supplement. And, I've always had an interest in melatonin and light, hygiene, circadian rhythm, and of course, blocking blue light, which is why I'm wearing my little blue blockers. So my interest led me to you, Dr. John, and your book, Melatonin Miracle Molecule Beyond Sleep. From
Excellent.
Skin health to virus protection to fat loss to allergies to parasites, melatonin has been shown in the research to be an amazing assister, some sort of assistance to these issues and more. And if you've struggled with using melatonin before, you guys are going to want to listen in anyway, because it's imperative that we utilize our own melatonin production too. And we're going to talk about how to do that. So let's dive in. Dr. Lieurance, welcome.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
Yeah, no worries. I understand.
To talk about my favorite subject.
I know, I can tell that it is. And I recently toured your facility, which is amazing. I highly recommend people check you out if they're in the Sarasota area or just even in the state of Florida. It's worth the drive. So, and I understand that you're a paddleboard lover too. So from one sup lover to another, it's an honor to interview you.
Awesome.
So folks listening to this may have a preconceived notion that melatonin, which is our sleep hormone, is only for sleep, but it's so much more. But let's start with what parts of the body, since most people know what melatonin is, what parts of the body produce this powerful antioxidant? And it's not just the pineal gland, right?
No. I want people to wrap their heads around this, that there's cycles that the body goes through, right? So there's cycles where you're feasting and you're fasting. And that's a whole nother subject I'm sure you've gone into with some of your shows in the past. And then there's a sleep-wake cycle, but it's a little bit more than just you're awake versus you're asleep. It's there's very interesting rhythms that occur when you're awake. Your body is in a status where your sympathetic nervous system is more activated, where you're able to go find food and you're able to take care of things, right? And so when we're awake, there's a number of chemical reactions and a certain set of physiological standards that your body basically adapts to, versus when you're sleeping. And so when you're sleeping, it's going to be more of what's called a parasympathetic kind of activation, where you're more kind of in a resting and digesting and rejuvenation situation. And so melatonin is the primary activators for that, because when you have sunlight shining on the body and into the eyes, it actually inhibits melatonin to be circulating and to be active. When it's nighttime and we have total darkness, it's a activation for that melatonin to start being released and start being more activated. And so melatonin's kind of at the core of the symphony. He's orchestrating the sleep wake cycle in that sense. And what when the lights go off and when people go to sleep and we start going into this parasympathetic state, there are some really wonderful things that happen that allow us to return to this sympathetic daytime with more resilience. And so what happens to a lot of people is they never really get enough of that repair and that rejuvenation, where they go back into that next day and it's a constant wear, right? They're just wearing themselves down more and more and more. So when I look at melatonin, and after digging through, I can't even tell you how many research papers and looking over all of the data, creating this book that's, almost 600 pages. It's almost like a textbook, right?
Right.
I would say that my, if I were to give it, one sentence, I would say melatonin seems to be the primary stress buffer of anything else. So it allows us to have stress and to be able to buffer that stress so that we can then handle more stress, right? Or so it has to do with really every type of stress that you can think of. And it's not just mental, emotional stress. When I talk to patients about this, a lot of times there's like, oh, well, no, my husband and I, we talk and like we've got, my stress level's really low. And I'm thinking, okay, well, it's not just mental, emotional stress. We're talking about, gravity is a stressor, right? Exactly. Exercise is a stressor. Poor air quality is a stressor. Poor food quality is a stressor. You can start going, down the path, and there's so many different stressors. And so in each one of these, sun is a stressor, right? So, if it's okay with you, maybe we can first kind of just dive into skin and melatonin.
Yeah, for sure. And also along with that, you mentioned in your book, EMF is a stressor. Blue light is obviously a stressor because that will deplete our melatonin. Mm-hmm. And then also, like we were talking about, it's not just in the pineal gland. You mentioned the gut. It's actually made in the gut, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the gut produces 400 times more melatonin than the brain does. Mm. And the microbiome, just like you, we're on a circadian rhythm. And so when the microbiome is exposed to melatonin, it goes into what's called microbiome swarming. So this is just like our body rejuvenating itself. The good bacteria in our gut go through this rejuvenation process when melatonin is peaking. Yeah, for sure. Every cell in the body requires melatonin, and it's produced in the mitochondria, of all places that are just extremely important, because it's a master antioxidant. So when the cell makes energy, there's oxidation that occurs, and that oxidation is neutralized by melatonin as a buffer, right? And so when things start to get too heated up, then we can get into trouble because the body says, okay, we can't make energy this way anymore because we're getting too much stress. And it defaults to another way of making energy called aerobic glycolysis. Mm-hmm. They also call this the Warburg effect, named after a scientist named Otto Warburg. Back in the 50s, he won the the 40s, 30s or 40s, he won the Nobel Prize. And Hitler didn't let him go accept it. But this guy was such a genius. He actually discovered how oxygen and cancer can't coexist. And he was able to actually define what happens in a cancer cell. And this is literally what happens with chronically stressed cells across the board. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at the end result of chronic stress, it is cancer. That's like the end of the end of the end, when the cell just says, all right, I give up. Yeah. I give up, and I'm going to switch to this very primitive form of making energy because I can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. The oxidation's too high, the inflammation's too high, and you're only able to produce about 10% of the energy through this other pathway. Mm-hmm. COVID is another really good example of where the cytokine storm that everybody's hearing about is where the cell just basically says, that's it, I can't take anymore. Mm. The inflammation's too much, and it switches to this other energy pathway. And that's when the cytokine storm really takes over, because you're losing the war at that point. Yeah. Yeah. And it all has to do with the Warburg effect. Now, the great part about this, because this sounds terrible, right? Oh my gosh, well, this is all gloom and doom. But what's really interesting is the science has found that if we supplement with melatonin it can actually shift it back to the normal energy production. And so that's why I think in today's age, there are so many stressors that it just makes sense that we start thinking more seriously about supplementing with, not just with melatonin, but higher doses of melatonin.
Right.
And not to be afraid of melatonin. We can talk about aspects of that and safety if you'd like.
Yeah, for sure. And I loved going back to the cytokines. I loved in your book where you mentioned suppressing the production of cytokines, for instance, without what happens with COVID. And what about the benefits of melatonin to aid in autoimmune disorders and other illnesses? Because you mentioned in there how it can actually rid the body of senescent or zombie cells. This is so fascinating. So we can think of zombie cells as damaged cells that won't die, but they keep producing waste and rob us of vital energy. So melatonin can clean that up. And so it does a lot for our immune system. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I've been in medicine, and natural medicine, chiropractic and naturopathic medicine for almost 30 years now. And I've gone through a lot of evolutions as a clinician. And it's always been my goal to figure out what's at the core, like what's the furthest upstream I can go to fix this patient. And what I'm finding is that working on cellular energy is about as upstream as you can get, right? And I call that metabolic medicine, right? Or mitochondrial medicine. And this is the reason that, our company is called Mitozen, right? And we make a variety of different products that are kind of focused around mitochondria. And so if we're looking at energy as like such an important currency, when we run out of energy, we run out of gas in the tank, then the body doesn't have the energy to do what it needs to do, right? So whether it's house cleaning, whether it's building proteins, whether it's building hormones, or whether it's regulating the autonomic nervous system, there's so many things that require energy. And when we run out of energy, then that's when things start to fail. My belief is that the body is a self-healing, self-regulating machine. I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, God put together this amazing symphony of amazement that for us to think that we're so bold that we're going to throw this and this at it and it's going to fix this whole system versus, going to the very core, providing the energy for the body and then allowing the wisdom of the body to do that work. That's kind of where I'm at these days with my clinical situation. So a lot of the types of treatments that we do in my clinic revolve around rebuilding people's cellular energy. And that's why I like melatonin so well, is because that's really at the core. What it allows folks to do is to have stronger energy reserves and to protect their mitochondria.
Yeah, there's so much in your book about the research that you've done in all the vast different areas of how melatonin affects the body. And going back to the immune system, even allergies, melatonin can help with allergies too.
Yeah. So oftentimes, I think of allergies as like the cup runneth over, right? So we have a certain level of toxicity that our body can tolerate. Sometimes it is a hypersensitivity, but other times it's just a buildup of inflammation and toxicity in the body that it becomes a little bit hypervigilant with exposure to certain things. So when we start looking at treating patients with metabolic medicine and enhancing their energy reserves, then things start to become more normalized. Like, just from a toxicity standpoint, imagine that you didn't have the energy to keep your house clean, right? And we've all been there. We've been like kind of in a lazy funk and, maybe we're going through some challenges and we're not sleeping well and we just don't have the energy. We get home, we throw things around. And so our house becomes super cluttered, right? It's super dirty. And so this happens to the cell as well. And then once you start getting that energy back, all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, let's clean up and let's do some housekeeping. So oftentimes when we start to get that cellular energy kicking again, people will start detoxing and actually cleaning things out quite a bit. Mm. And that's going to be like your really basic explanation of how melatonin works on allergies, but it's also, you could use that same example on how it works on virtually every disease condition.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned cancer earlier, and I have so many clients coming that have been diagnosed with cancer recently. And one of my first protocols straight away is to put them on a high dose melatonin. So I definitely want to hear your thoughts on that. But up until I came across your products, it was all I could find was oral availability, which, as I understand, isn't that effective.
Yeah, it's only 2.5% absorbable orally, according to the research. So we created a liposomal version of Sandman, which is the melatonin product. And we also have a suppository. And I feel like the suppository is really the superior route of delivery, just because the absorption characteristic of a suppository is so much different than any oral product that you can take. And we have to look at something called peak plasma, which means that if I take a pill, that pill then goes into my gut, and my gut absorbs it into my bloodstream. And that substance is going to peak in my bloodstream. And that peak might be 30 minutes, or it could be 45 minutes, or it could be an hour and a half. But that's what peak plasma is like, how long are your cells given the opportunity to pull a certain nutrient into the cell, right? And that's where you get peak plasma really matters, because that's going to depend on the intracellular absorption of a nutrient. So if you can expand peak plasma to 3, 4, 5, 7 hours, the cell can absorb a lot more of that nutrient. And that's really where it counts, because that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Is in the cell.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to cancer, so why is melatonin so effective at high doses for those with cancer? Is it the antioxidant effect of it, or is there more to it than that?
Well, a lot of it has to do with this this description that we talked earlier when we first started talking about the switch in energy production. And so cancer cells, they don't use what is typically used, which is called the electron transport chain. So mitochondria, think about those as like little tiny bacteria, because that's really what they are. You know, there's hundreds of thousands of them in each cell, and they're little teeny bacteria, and they're in the cell, and their job is to move electrons, right? So they're in there shuffling those electrons, and in the process of moving them, it produces heat. It's considered in chemistry exothermic. So there's heat that comes out, and the body harnesses that exothermic reaction, and it makes something called ATP, which is the energy currency that basically drives all of the different jobs that your cells do. And when the stressor is to an extent where the cell decides that it can't continue to use that method anymore, it defaults to aerobic glycolysis, which is what cancer cells do. So all cancer cells are using this aerobic glycolysis. It's very, very primitive. It's also called fermentation. And so when you give melatonin, what happens is it allows the cell to start moving electrons again. It starts to return to its normal way of making energy. And so if you were to have, say, a cancer cell, typically, because we're always producing cancer cells, and we find them and our body tags them, and then they're basically, autophagy. We talked about that earlier, goes and kind of gobbles them up and recycles them. But we have a failure in recognizing them oftentimes, and we have a failure in like cleaning these up through autophagy. So these are responses that require energy. And when we don't have the energy, these responses don't get done.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
It's starting to kind of make a little bit more sense.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think that it comes down to with cancer, I often wonder, is it something to do with circadian rhythm too? Like, have these folks, for whatever reason, got out of rhythm in their light cycle, in their environment, in their timing of how they do things, in their hormones and how they're being released, because we make melatonin by the action of serotonin, getting that serotonin. And I want you to explain how we can make it, but we may not release it. And I'm just wondering if that has something to do with the influx of modern technology. Since the invention of the light bulb, we've seen more illness, disease, cancer, diabetes than ever before. Could it be that we're blocking our own release of melatonin, and we really need to maybe even think about supplementing melatonin to help our body get back that circadian rhythm that could heal a lot of mechanisms? What do you say about that?
Well, yeah, for sure. There was a lot there. Let me see if I can go through. And so, yeah, tryptophan goes to serotonin, then serotonin is converted into melatonin. And if we aren't given like a dark environment, then this doesn't get released, and it doesn't trigger that whole process that melatonin normally goes through.
Okay.
If when we wake up and we have light shined in our eyes, then this stops that whole process, and that's where cortisol starts to go up, and our sympathetics start to come on board. So when you look at that as like a normal, you have darkness and you have light, things that will provide light when you want darkness, like if your room isn't completely dark, that can inhibit the circadian rhythm a little bit. And then EMF also can trick your pineal into thinking that that's actually sunlight, because it kind of travels right through your skull, and then at night, one of the things that you'll hear a lot with people that are big sleep experts is they'll talk about wearing blue blocking glasses and avoiding watching TV and not looking at your cell phone and your iPad. Those blue and green lights are really present in our skies during the day. And so that's why we get triggered to be more awake. And so I wear prescription blue blocking sunglasses when I watch TV at night, and I can easily wake myself up if I'm feeling tired and I don't want to go to sleep by just lifting my glasses up and just staring at the TV for a minute or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I just see so much mismatch in society of when it comes to circadian rhythm. Like many people know I'm an RVer. I live in my RV full time, and you'll go out at night and a lot of these RVs are covered with like their bright blue light when people are sitting outside. So they're sitting in front of their little campfire, but then they've got all these LED blue lights around their awning. And I just want to tell them, wait, you're not going to be able to sleep tonight. You just got to turn all this off and just watch the fire, get off your phone, get off your tablet while you're sitting in front of the fire and just look at the fire. But it's not just that. I mean, it's society in general. I just feel like there's a big push for the modern technology, and everything is smart this and smart that, and we're connected all the time, and we're on Facebook and playing words with friends late at night. But I think there needs to be an element of getting back that circadian rhythm. And would you say that because melatonin is kind of a cool molecule in that it doesn't thwart your own production, does it always also work on the other end where it actually helps you get back into rhythm? When you start to supplement it, will you get back into rhythm? And then also maybe you want to touch on the negative feedback loop aspect.
Yeah, so you don't stop your own production with that particular hormone. Melatonin does not have a negative feedback loop. In other words, you can take as much as you want, and it will have no impact on the amount of melatonin that you would produce the following night. And so there's also no toxic levels that they've been able to discover with melatonin. They've gone up to what would be 150,000 milligrams for, a 70 kilogram person, which is about 150 pounds or so. So there's really not like, anything to fear with melatonin. There are some pitfalls, that come up. It's not a really easy supplement to just grab and start taking, because there are some things that can be challenging. Sometimes people find themselves overly groggy when they first start dosing with melatonin. And we can kind of talk about that. Sometimes people get an opposite effect, where they feel more excitable. It's called a paradoxical effect. If you look at WebMD, you'll see a variety of different side effects listed. I think that there's been some misinformation put out there, especially to our healthcare providers, that there might be some danger associated with melatonin. And, what's interesting about that WebMD, that list of side effects is the exact same side effects that they found in the placebo arm, which is the people that weren't taking any melatonin, but they don't tell you that because they're just kind of, sometimes I think that there's conspiracies against inexpensive, unpatentable strategies to health,
and that actually work, and they're actually going to the root of the problem instead of treating a symptom, so yeah. What about hormones and melatonin? So like female hormones, I'm seeing across the board when people are bringing me their blood work that their testosterone is tanked, their estrogen is through the roof, whether they're male or female, their progesterone is tanked. Like, can we expect that melatonin can help with the hormones?
Well, if you have better restorative sleep, if your body is less in a sympathetic state, I can tell you firsthand, like, I go to Hawaii. I grew up in Hawaii, right? And I go out there fairly often. And I would say I lead a fairly adrenalized life. I'm up early, either writing or doing yoga. I will meditate in the morning, but I stay busy. I come to the clinic. I see a lot of patients. I'm fairly active after work. And so then when I go to Hawaii, everything's just, the jets are kicked into neutral. And I can always tell that my hormones are way more robust. I can just feel that my testosterone's higher. And so it's because I'm not adrenalized, right? So when you start looking at melatonin, one of the things that we find people have really, really good results with is improving their heart rate variability. Okay. So in order to for this to make sense for people listening to this, you want to look at heart rate variability like this. There's your autonomic nervous system, which is the side of your nervous system that you don't have to think about. It kind of runs your digestion, your heart, your blood supply, your hormones. There's the fight or flight, and then the resting digestion. We've already talked about that. So the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Melatonin is the most powerful activator of the parasympathetic nervous system. So when we start to run low in melatonin, we start to suffer from less parasympathetic, and we start having too much of the sympathetic because it's not balanced, right? So with heart rate variability, your heart is innervated by both sides of this nervous system. And if it's equally innervated, the parasympathetic will jump in and the sympathetic, and it'll kind of go back and forth, and you have variations in your heartbeat, right? When you start to run low with like one or the other sides of your autonomics, which it's almost always less parasympathetic, because that's just the situation. I mean, it's stress that we have too much of. Then the heart rate variability goes down, and that's what happens with age. Normally, there's a graph that shows heart rate variability going drastically down as we get older, and the graph looks exactly the same with melatonin in age. So there's a big correlation between those two. So people that start supplementing with melatonin find that their heart rate variability is just incredible. So
I love that aspect of adrenaline, because I feel like many people are running on adrenaline because of the stress of the system we're living in, living in COVID world and living in this time where we've never had so much social pressure on us as we do now with social media and all the different outlets and things like that. And so what I see is like many people with this adrenaline dominant type of body are putting on weight. They're not losing weight. They're actually getting heavier. And to that effect, if we can calm the stress by doing, a high dose melatonin supplement, that will counteract a lot of the adrenaline, right? Like the high dose melatonin can actually counteract a lot of that adrenaline.
Yeah. So sometimes clinicians, or, just end users will use melatonin during the day, and there can be an inhibition to stress responses in that way if it's dosed during the day. But specifically, when you have strong circadian rhythm signaling, so when you're really diving deeper into that parasympathetic resting and digesting phase while you're sleeping, it's going to keep your sympathetic nervous system more balanced because you have a stronger parasympathetic nervous system, right? So it's just like a muscle. Like if you have your bicep muscle versus your tricep muscle, there's a term called reciprocal inhibition, meaning that if my bicep is too strong, it's going to inhibit my tricep. The same thing happens with the autonomics.
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, I know, because this is something that it could be so simple as just dialing in their circadian rhythm, trying a high dose melatonin to see some of that weight that's unexplained coming off because they're really calming that stress response. So, yeah. And so talking about something really interesting, because we've touched on it several times, but you recommend a suppository or a liposomal instead of oral. Why is that? Like, talk about the absorption. I know you mentioned that the oral was only 2.5%, but why is it so much better absorbed through, the exit ramp only, if you will?
Yeah. Well, we talked about peak plasma.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that when different nutrients are absorbed through the mouth, it has to be subjected to a lot of the stomach acids and digestive enzymes. Yeah. And then it has something called first pass, where it has to go through the liver. And typically the liver takes and it breaks everything down into its individual components, and it has to put it back together on the other side. And so that's why you lose a lot of nutrients through digestion. And this is one of the reasons why intravenous approaches are so helpful. Is it goes directly into the bloodstream, and so that's what you get with the the suppository version. Anybody that hasn't done a suppository before and they're listening to this, it's really no big deal. No. I mean, it takes 30 seconds. It's there. You don't even know it's there, and you can go on throughout your day. Another really amazing nutrient that also supports the mitochondria is NAD. And so we were the first company to kind of start making a NAD suppository. And, prior to that, we were running IVs on patients because NAD doesn't absorb really at all orally. So these IVs, though, you have to go slowly because if you go too fast, you get these symptoms. So we'd literally have patients that would be here for, 5, 6, 7 hours, doing this slow drip. And then they would kind of have the symptoms, right? And we would charge, $1,000, $1,500 for this IV. Whereas now, we're able to send people home with a suppository for a fraction of the cost, less than $20. And it actually has the same, potential benefit that this IV has. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of NAD. I've done the injections before, and you're so right. It takes forever. But yeah, to do it suppository style would be much easier. I'm going to try that next, because I tried what got me really interested in your product was the first suppository I'd ever tried. I'd never, like I said, put anything up the exit ramp. So when I tried it, it changed my sleep. In fact, my sleep was pretty good. I would wake up once or twice, but now my brain shut off. Like I'd never felt that before, where I felt like at night when I was sleeping, I was still kind of, I could wake right up and think about a thought I had to do, or my brain was kind of always buzzing with energy. I
Mhm.
could fall asleep thinking about something and wake up thinking about the same thing. So I'm like, did it ever shut off? Like I was sleeping, but did my brain shut off? No, when I took your melatonin, now this was a high dose, and I
Mhm.
took it with there was some of the hemp extract in there, the magnolia. I mean, it's such a well thought out, the glutathione suppository, and my brain shut off. Like I woke up in the morning and I was like, I had to think for a second what had happened. And I think that's
Mhm.
how people are supposed to sleep. And I wasn't sleeping like that. So
Uh,
talk to me about the high dose, like this 200 milligrams that's in the suppository.
yeah. Well, we even have the Super Sandman, which is 425 milligrams.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I've got some patients that I'm dosing, close to a gram a day.
That's awesome.
Um, and, so probably the smartest person I know with regards to melatonin is Russell Ryder. He's a PhD and an MD. And he was the first doctor to discover that the pineal was more than just a worthless gland,
Mhm.
or, he was able to prove that, in the lab scientifically. And he went on to do and co-author and author a lot of different research studies on melatonin for a variety of different conditions. And what I found fascinating was he himself takes 100 to 200 milligrams every night.
Mm.
And, that speaks volumes to me. So again, like we talked about before, there's no negative feedback loop, and there's no toxic level. So there's no real fear with regards to either of those issues. And then when you start looking at melatonin more than just for sleep, so if you were just looking to do it for sleep, some people might be able to get away with taking very light doses of melatonin. I've had a lot of patients that I've talked to that claim that they would take a couple of milligrams and it would really help their sleep.
Mhm.
So what we're talking about is using melatonin for much more than that, and understanding that, it has a spillover into all the cells of the body. So, but at the same time, there's been a lot of people I've spoken to that have tried smaller doses of melatonin with kind of limited results. And when they went in with the higher doses, they really felt like it wasn't, it really put them out, it put them down and let them really have some very strong, powerful, recuperative sleep.
Yeah, I mean, I can see now how it relates to everything, like you mentioned in the book, because when we get that rest and repair and we get that rejuvenation in the night, then so much of your body can clear out the garbage, like you said, and really get rid of toxins and clear out heavy metals. And even as your book mentions, helps with parasites, like if there's a parasitic infection going on. So even going as far as this EMF, that maybe we can't turn off all these devices and we've got our Wi-Fi on at night. Melatonin helps with that too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they found that it buffers the negative effects of EMF.
Okay.
They did some studies with that, and so I still think it's important that we should shut our,
I do too.
especially while you sleep. I mean,
Absolutely.
in any other, protect your bedroom, protect your sleeping environment, turn off the Wi-Fi router or do something to kind of protect your space from that EMF. But it's impossible to shield yourself 24/7.
Mm.
So by taking melatonin, you can assure yourself that you're going to get, more protected.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, so you have on your website so many amazing products. Maybe we could just talk about first Sandman, since that's kind of what we've been talking about as far as melatonin. Sandman's like the melatonin one, but there's so many other great products that I want you to just like go through rapid fire and tell us about, because I think people should understand you're offering a lot of different methodologies of getting these into your body versus just taking an oral capsule, which is so much more effective. And I've seen it
Mhm.
firsthand. So go on, tell us what some of your favorites are.
Oh, well, Methyl Max is a good product. I'm finding a lot of people post COVID really have a lot of challenges with methylation, which is another form of detox. And so there's some wonderful methylation supports and B vitamins and folic acid, all of which are difficult to absorb orally. So for, kind of boosting and supporting the brain and nervous system and methylation pathways, Methylmax is really a great product. We only carry that one in the suppository.
Okay.
We have a kit called Fast Track Fast. And so it's a three-phase program where we have patients preload before they go into a fasting phase with NAD. And then while they're fasting, we have a product called Lucitol, which is really designed as a support for the brain, especially when the brain's under stress. And it's a powerful anti-inflammatory. But all of these polyphenols that are in this product are what's called senolytics. And so they promote autophagy, and they clear up these kind of zombie inflammatory cells called senescent cells. And that's really what you want to do when you're fasting. So to be able to go into and fast, and then on top of that, accentuate that signaling with the Lucitol. And even for folks that are just doing intermittent fasting, that might be maybe having one meal a day or 2 meals a day, they skip breakfast. The Lucitol could be a great product to take in the morning to just get a deeper, kind of cleansing in that fasting window. And then after the fast is done, we have a product called Stemtor, which, is going to do the opposite. You're going to be increasing the signaling where your body's going to want to grow more cells and tissues, right? It's the opposite of that breakdown and recycling with autophagy. So that one, Stemtor has deer antler velvet, rhodiola, HMB, and leucine, which is the primary amino acid that activates that.
Yeah, I love HMB. That's a good one too. Okay, you have a product that has one of my favorite compounds in it, which is highly controversial, but I love methylene blue. So do you want to touch on that?
Oh, well, almost like we could do a whole show on methylene blue. I'm equally as impressed by that molecule as I am melatonin.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, it gets into the mitochondria, and it acts as an electron transport donor. So it sits there and just feeds electrons to the mitochondria. And it's got antimicrobial properties to it. It's really amazing. So we produced a 60 milligram suppository.
Nice.
And we also have a 300 milligram suppository that we don't recommend using rectally because it's a little bit hard to retain.
Okay.
But what's nice about it is that you can break it into little pieces and use those pieces orally so that your mouth doesn't turn blue.
Okay.
Because it's so the suppository mold, what holds the suppository in that bullet shape, palm oil.
Okay.
So basically the methylene blue is suspended in like a hard palm oil. So you can take those chunks and you can kind of throw them in the back of your throat and drink, water or a drink. And so you're able to get the methylene blue into your system orally very nicely with that 300 milligram suppositories. So that's kind of how we're rolling with that here in the clinic. We're instructing patients on those two methods, and then we're having them expose themselves to red light in the 660 nanometer. So we have these red light panels that we recommend people get in front of. We recommend people get out in the sun. Here in the clinic, we have a protocol where we're infusing methylene blue IV.
Oh my gosh.
And then we have a laser catheter that's literally like right in the vein, and it's basically showering the laser onto all the blood cells. They kind of travel through the vein there, and then we use hyperbaric oxygen and another type of oxygen therapy called a CVAC, which is like this spaceship pod like device. And I mean, I've seen a lot in my career, and I've done a lot, and I have not seen anything produce this more, consistent, dramatic improvements with some of my patients that I'm seeing here clinically. We had a Parkinson's patient a few days ago that literally his ability to walk and speak was just radically improved after just one IV with this.
That's like my Disney World is like your clinic. Like I want to go to Disney World and get all of these treatments, especially that methylene blue. Oh my gosh, I have not even heard about intravenous methylene blue. So and I love using my methylene blue I drop on the back of my tongue. Like you said, they're drops. So I can't wait to try yours. But I always try to use it with my red light too. And so the fact that you're doing that with the red light is amazing.
Well, by the time this podcast comes out, it depends on the timing of it, but we may have our methylene blue nasal spray out by then. We've finished the formulation, so we're going to be probably offering that on our website soon, and that's going to be Lumitol NS, nice. Which is a Lumitol nasal spray.
Okay, I can't wait to get that. I'm going to get my hands on that for sure. Because so another delivery you have is nasal sprays. You have one that's for CBD.